Good afternoon, guys. I'm just uploading my first review video. So I decided yesterday that I'm going to take the Unit 1 review and I'm going to break that down into 3 different videos. So I'll post one today, one tomorrow, and one Thursday. That way, apart from you just reading through this, you'll have a little bit more to look at. So just wanted to touch base on that. I also found a video that I'll post in the links on Teams that breaks down some of the things I'm going to be talking about today as well, to give you a different voice. Guy's a lot better at editing videos than I am, so there's a little bit more charts and graphs in there for you to look at. So what are we going to talk about today? So Unit 1 is all about constitutional democracy, foundations of American government. So our government from the Declaration of Independence through the Constitution, what's going on, what properties exist in our government, how did the founding fathers frame our government, why did they do things that way, okay? So looking at the beginning of this review packet, so this is the Unit 1 review materials sheet that I told you about in my last video. It is uploaded onto Teams under Files in the Class Materials folder, okay? So early on, our first government, we have the Declaration of Independence. We shift into the Articles of Confederation. I know that you guys remember that the Articles of Confederation is weak because it gives too much power to the states, not enough power to the federal government to do things like tax, have a national currency, raise an army, things like that, okay? So looking at the unit's essential questions, 3 questions that we want to study throughout this review. So how did the founders of the Constitution attempt to protect individual liberty while also promoting public order and safety? How have theory, debate, and compromise influenced the constitutional system? So our compromises, right? New Jersey Plan, Virginia Plan, Great Compromise, Three-Fifths Compromise, things like that. And how does the development and interpretation of the Constitution influence policies that impact citizens and residents of the United States? All right, so how the College Board does this. So this sheet is broken down exactly the way the College Board frames this unit. And again, because they're only using units 1 through 3, I wanted to kind of go with just their language here. So it might be a little different, but we're still going to be okay. So big idea 1, a balance between governmental power and individual rights, hallmark political development. So some of these terms, you should remember these. These are US terms as well. I talked about my book too with the Enlightenment. But big things, natural rights, John Locke, right? You guys remember from the Enlightenment, these new thinkers, new ways of thinking about government. An absolute monarchy might not be the best idea. Maybe we want to have the people run the government, right? So those 3 natural rights, life, liberty, and property, Thomas Jefferson, you know, rewrites them in the Declaration of Independence to say life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Just because not all colonists had access to owning property. But these 3 terms are going to be fundamental in the development of the United States. And this term here, natural rights, is something that you absolutely need to know. Okay. Popular sovereignty, I'm just going to breeze past. I think you guys know that. Just power resides in the people, that if there's a land that has defined borders, that the people that live inside those borders have the right to control that land. Okay. Other 2, same thing. I think that these are more review. Republicanism, government in which people elect representatives. If you remember in class all the way back in the beginning of the year, I said when you see republicanism, just think rep, so as in representatives. So in a direct democracy, right, I think ancient Athens, a direct democracy, the people would vote on everything. We're voting on whether or not we're going to pass a law, collect a tax, you know, build this road, build that road. In a republic form of government, we are going to elect individuals that make those decisions for us. And then social contracts, another Enlightenment term, agreement between the people, signifying their consent to be governed. So in this social contract, it's an imaginary contract that exists, or if you really want to say it, the Constitution can be a social contract, but that we as the people decided that we're going to give the government the power to kind of limit certain aspects of our life, right? I can't go out and do whatever I want. I can't speed on the roads. I can't run stop signs. You know, I can't just decide that I want to break into somebody's house. So I give up some of those freedoms, but it's for the greater good, that the government's going to also protect certain liberties that I have, okay? So where do these ideas come from? They start with the Declaration of Independence. So that's where I'm going to start here too. If you remember, the Declaration of Independence is a breakup letter, okay? It's effectively the the founding fathers saying to King George, like, hey, it's not you, it's us, but it's really you, and we're going to break up with you. Here's all the things that you did wrong to justify why we're breaking up with you. Have a good day. Okay. So the purpose of the Declaration of Independence is just to justify the break from Great Britain, giving a whole bunch of reasons why we wanted to be independent, right? No taxation without representations in there. The fact that the American colonists weren't given fair trials in front of their peers. A lot of times they were taken back to England to stand trial, which violated a lot of people's rights in the opinions of the founding fathers, things like that. Okay. Main idea: all men are created equal. There's certain inalienable rights that you're born with that cannot be taken away from you, and that if the people feel that the government's violating those rights, they have the ability to then overthrow that government. Okay. So big names you need to know from the Declaration of Independence are really Jefferson, Adams, and Franklin. Sherman and Livingston get grouped in. They're kind of the forgotten about framers of the Declaration of Independence. But overall, you remember Jefferson wrote it. Adams and Franklin kind of revise it with him. You'll be okay. Remember, big kind of idea here. He says all men are created equal, but it doesn't include a lot of groups, right? We're not talking about African Americans. We're not talking about women. We're basically talking about white men that own property being created equal. And we're going to get into that when we talk about our types of democracy here that frame the Constitution. Okay. So the Articles of Confederation is a foundational document that you need to know. But again, I think that it's easier to skip over because the things you need to know for your exam are pretty straightforward. You need to know it's weak. You need to know it doesn't work. You need to know that the federal government didn't have enough power and that the states had too much power. Okay. And then because of that, the whole idea of states having more power than the federal government, that's going to frame your anti-federalist arguments that we see in Brutus 1 and that we talk about when we get into some of those constitutional compromises. Okay. With the Constitution, we know, and I've used this term in class before, the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. All other laws, no matter what level, they be federal, state, or local laws, the Constitution kind of overrides all of those things. Okay. So if the government says, hey, you can't discriminate against somebody based on their sexuality, the city of Buffalo can't pass a law that discriminates against people based on their sexuality. Okay. Main ideas in the Constitution, it's going to outline the structures of the three branches of government. We see that in Articles 1, Article 2, and Article 3. Okay. So we'll get to those in the next video, but just kind of the idea of where those are coming from, separation of powers, checks and balances, things like that. All right. So the last thing I'm going to talk about in this video is just to finish up this page here, theories of representative democracy. And we did this in depth in class. We spent a couple days on this, but we haven't talked about it in a while. Okay. It's something that was very beginning of the year. We want to kind of come back and look at this again. So a participatory democracy is the first theory. And again, these are theories because they've all been put into practice. They all have a place in governments, not just here, but around the world. And there's no proof that one of them is somehow inherently better than the others. Okay. So theories of representative democracy, starting with participatory democracy, everybody can participate in decisions. So we want to think back to the colonial era, U.S. history, right? Those New England town meetings. Everybody could come, kind of propose their own ideas, speak their minds. We see this in initiatives and referendums in state and local governments where people can show up and voice their concerns for their local community. The House of Representatives being initially directly elected by the people. Today, even if we want to throw in there with the 17th Amendment, senators being directly elected by the people could be an example of this. The Iowa caucuses, I put that one in there because we've just been talking about, the election a little bit. So remember, in a caucus, everybody shows up to the polling place. It's not a private ballot. It's everybody talks. We determine which candidate we want to represent our district. Okay. So participatory, just think participation. Everybody's going to participate. Every person has a voice. All right. I'm going to skip pluralist for a second and go to elite because I think that talking about participatory and elite first makes pluralist democracy a little bit easier to understand. So elite democracy, remember when we talk about the founding fathers, they're basically a group of very highly educated, for the most part, wealthy, well-off, married to wealthy women, and they're kind of like the elite members of society. They own property, a lot of them own slaves, and it's not like it's the people like you and I that would be showing up to write the Declaration of Independence, the Articles of Confederation, or the Constitution, right? So this elitist democracy kind of comes out of that, that there's these privileged classes in society that are basically able to acquire power and compete for people's votes. So we see this, right? A lot easier for a billionaire like Donald Trump to run for president than it would be for, let's say, Mr. Gregoire to run for president, right? Even though we all know Mr. Gregoire might do a better job. So this elitist democracy is basically this idea that the general public, especially at the time that the Constitution is written, not everybody's educated, not everybody knows how to read and write, not everybody knows the grand scheme of what's going on in the United States outside of maybe their own property or town. So we can't trust the people. So we need to have this kind of elitist idea. So this is where we get things like the Electoral College, okay? That, yeah, the people voted, but like, did they do a good job? Maybe we have to change their votes. You know, this could be, right? If you remember too, the Senate's initially chosen by state legislators and governors. So basically, state by state, these elected members, they're choosing the senators because we can't trust the people to do that, okay? It's not until the 17th Amendment, like I said before, where that's going to change. So today, if we want to use kind of a modern example of elitist democracy, the majority of your politicians are very wealthy and well educated, right? We see constantly Bernie Sanders, even, right? He's somebody that a lot of you guys like to talk about. Bernie Sanders is a millionaire. He has 3 houses. He has a lot of money. He makes a lot of money, and he's allowed to kind of get himself in the limelight to be an elected official. Okay. Donald Trump, we know, is a billionaire. Elizabeth Warren's a millionaire with a PhD, right? High education, able to kind of get that financial backing to be able to push themselves through the door. So that leads us to kind of this middle ground, the pluralist democracy. And the word plural, if I can say it, the word plural means more than one, right? So a model democracy that stresses vigorous competition amongst various interests in a free society. So pluralist democracy is where we get involved these interest groups, we get the media involved, where basically we have a government that is pushed by people with varying opinions, right? More than one opinion is going to take hold into our government. So basically, if you want to think about the NRA, which is the example over here, right? So it says lack of new regulations in public opinion polls, lack of new gun regulations despite public opinion polls due to NRA influence, right? So even though the majority of Americans might want new gun control laws or legislation, the NRA influences the government enough where they're not going to change those things, right? People want to talk about Social Security reform, but the AARP, which we know benefits the elderly, they're going to try to make sure that that's not going to happen, okay? And we see this in Federalist 10. If you remember, in Federalist 10, I told you guys right before we left school to think of Federalist 10, right? Factions. The 10 takes the place of the I and the O to remember. So James Madison talking about those factions, that the government is actually going to run better because there's those multiple factions are going to have different ideas, and those different ideas are going to lead to compromises and basically allow for the minorities to be able to, have a little bit more of a say. So these 3 types, right, all of them have a role. You can see there's examples in government policies, there's examples in government institutions, debates, current events, things like that. So they're all there, okay? And then just at the bottom here, before I wrap up this video, for big idea 1, couple things, right? The debate between Fed 10 and Brutus number 1. If you remember, Brutus 1 is the first anti-federalist paper, right? So the Federalists are writing papers called the Federalist Papers. The Anti-Federalists also have their own group of papers. And the first one, and the only one that you really need to know as an essential document, is Brutus 1. Brutus 1 is kind of pushing for a small government. So it kind of shows the tension between the broad participatory model and kind of a more filtered, we want to control who has a say between the pluralists and the elite models. Okay, so if you want to think about it this way, the Federalists, right, big government, want, the executive branch and things like that to have more power, more influence. That's more of an elitist idea. Whereas the anti-federalists, it's more of your small farmers, states' rights, right? That's going to be more of a participant. So I'll post this link here to this video on theories of democracy. I will also post into the class files the document on how I want you guys to be able to access those foundational documents. So what you had in your notes, okay? So I'll talk to you guys soon. Have a good night.